Hello, everyone. I welcome you to yet another episode of my podcast. Today, we are going to explore a very nice theme. We are going to talk about Jataka tales and how the tales have transformed from being mere stories to sort of maintain the brotherhood in early days of Buddhism to more than that. It has had cultural and many social influences that has been curated by many authors, and there have been research papers, but who has the time to read them, right? So I bring to you a simplified version of it. This podcast will take you through inflections of Jataka on our day-to-day lives, how we come across different situations or circumstances or ideas that were originally part of Jataka tales, and we will also explore different themes like tales in vernacular languages from Odisha. We will look at a few cave paintings, not cave paintings, but sculptures in Buddhist monuments, and we will also look at Bollywood movies, surprisingly, to trace how Jatakas have influenced and shaped our social and cultural heritage over thousands of years. To begin with, I would like to give you a brief background of what Jatakas are. Jataka stories were curated and sort of framed by monks in a very specific structure. It's a three-part story, and these stories talk about Gautam Buddha's previous life when he hadn't attained the enlightenment, and therefore he had partial virtues, not all of the virtues that he sort of attended in his enlightenment process, but in his previous life he had one of or two of those major virtues, the list of virtues. And these stories talk about how Buddha, because of these virtues, was better than the humans if he was in a human form, or any animal or outcast individual. So the story explores how his those virtues that he had made him unique, sort of solve certain social or ethical questions, and these stories were meant to preserve the sanctity of the virtues of the benign way of life, as well as make it interesting enough, relatable enough, so that it can be propagated orally. So for our viewers, writing wasn't a prevalent thing until like very recently, and only after Gutenberg's invention, we had usage of like we had mass production of text, but it was very limited. So all these histories or all these cultural or religious affairs were restricted to oral traditions only. So there's something very magnificent, let's say magnificent, about the structure of the Jatakas and the nature of it, that it has survived thousands of years. And we must take into account that this was a radical movement in the spiritual life of this was a breakaway from the Brahminical, I mean, like the Hinduism, the Brahminical version of Hinduism, and therefore this faced a lot of backlash as well. So every other new idea is not usually accepted by the society, because society thinks that the idea that it is based on is true. So we are very less susceptible to change when it comes to faith. Uh, so let's dive into what influences did Jataka have on day-to-day life of people, and how it has sort of transformed our cultural space, or our ideas, or even the bedtime stories that you're so fond of. So let's begin with inflectional stories. So I came about reading one Jataka story, and it suddenly reminded me of my grandmother fondly telling me one of the stories that she loves, and I will just explain that. So shortly came across this very interesting Jataka story, Vanarinda Jataka, in which the Jataka basically describes the life of Bodhisattva as a monkey king, and how he sort of had different he had so there's this constant bickering between with Buddha and Devadatta, in all the stories. So this is a very love-hate relationship they share, and in all these stories, Devadatta comes about as the villain of the story. So Vananda Jataka is one of the famous Jatakas, and it talks about how Buddha was basically a monkey, bodhisattva, and he was a monkey during the reign of Brahmadatta in Banaras. And the story sort of goes along tangentially as to how Buddha basically used his, sorry, Bodhisattva basically used his wits to overcome death, which was sort of the crooked plan of a crocodile. Again, the crocodile is Devadatta, no secrets, okay. And when I was reading the story, it has a very uncanny resemblance to one of the stories that I have heard before, and it's a Odia fairy tale sort of thingy, and it's very prevalent in our households. And I was really interested as to how some story that was told by my grandmother to me during our bedtime is actually a Jataka story. And since this was meant to remain within the brotherhood, how come the story has sort of expanded into a different folklore in itself? We started reading up on it, and realized that Jatakas actually. Wait. We're going into a lot of theory. This is not a talk show. This is a podcast. So let's go to a creative explanation of the story that my grandmother used to tell me a lot of times, and I enjoyed the shit out of it. जग सुना सुना लगे कोई रहे ना जब अपना
何お前はもう死んでいる。
This is business.
This is my sweat.
I know, but I did business.
Shut up. मुझको ना बता.
Yes! No! Fuck! Shit! Cunt!
क्यों किसी को वफा के बदले वफा नहीं मिलती.
Well, that was your host trying to make you happy in this sad little world. So yeah, basically you saw that this iteration of the story that we saw, this Odia folktale, is actually homologous to that of the skeletal structure of the story that is there in the Jataka. This is not the only instance where stories have percolated to say just the Odia folk tales. No, it's not the case. So if we see that has that the rich variety of Jataka tales, the structure of it and the content of it has been replicated many a times in the Panchatantras, in the Puranas, the Vishnu Puranas. Some academics have sort of found parallels between Jataka stories and that of Mahabharata and Ramayana stories. And it's interesting to see how these stories, which ironically was Jataka is a product of Buddhism, which was ironically a resistance, a rebellion against Brahminical Hinduism, ends up fueling the storytelling or the Puran setting of Brahminical Hinduism. And if you see Buddha's life or Buddhism in itself ends up being a paradox, because what once started as a departure from Brahminical Hinduism is soon appropriated by Brahminical Hinduism as Buddha as one of the avatars and Buddhism as one of the sects of Hinduism, because there's no such definition of Hinduism theologically. They conveniently made Buddha as one of the avatars of Vishnu Bhagavan, and there is Brahminical worship of Buddha, and even there is temple culture in my own state, that is Odisha, because the reigning deity, the popular deity in Odisha is Bhagavan Jagannath. He is The Jagannath temple in Puri is very famous, and it's one of the four dhams. And if you look at it, there are certain folklores, there are certain Puranas that depict Jagannath as one of the avatars of Buddha, the intermediary avatar between Buddha and Kalki avatar. It's really fascinating as something that uh, started off as a rebellion itself, goes on to fuel the religion that it wanted to depart from. That truly brings us to thinking about the Obi-Wan's dialogue that you live long enough, you either die as a hero or live long enough to die as a villain. No, no, I got it wrong. Let me check up. Because unlike news channel, we do fact check. Well, it wasn't from Star Wars. I'm really sorry. So I would like to quote the dialogue of Harbiden because it sort of best explains what happened with Buddhism over a period of time in India. Also, this, by the way, I would like to put up this disclaimer that Buddhism as a different idea, as a different religious and spiritual culture is very much prevalent and was very much prevalent. It's a widespread thing. It's, even if there has been attempts to Brahminize it or to Hinduize it, it has maintained sacred identity. It's a proper compartmentalized view of world and different sort of outlook. And even if we might be tempted to think so, we shouldn't be thinking that same as Hinduism because it's fundamentally different and it was a contestation against that of Brahminical Hinduism. So yeah, and Harbidant said this to Buddha from maybe Harbidant was a time traveler and he goes back from Gotham City and says, "Oh, Lord Buddha, greetings to you and my prayers to you. But you will soon be a Brahminical Hinduism deity, and so you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself as a villain." So let's move on from cultural instances, from stories to something very concrete. Jataka stories have had a rich influence on the Buddhist architecture. A lot of cave paintings in Ajanta and Ellora, stupas, depict very artistic depiction of these Jatakas. So from being just mere oral historiographies or oral tradition, they have gone into material realm, and the very beautiful sites that we have lost to our modern ideas of development is Nagarjun Konda it has a very nice depiction of these Jatakas, stills from Bodhisattva's Buddha's teaching in his Jataka tales. And what this sort of makes us think how our civilization, as an Indian civilization that we say today, has been a melting pot of different cultures, different ideas that have come about, and each time they have added something new, not just in the spiritual realm, but politically, through materiality, through artistic culture, architecture. They have left imprints, and this becomes sort of a cornerstone of further development. So at this point in time, when we are being constantly asked this question about exclusion, inclusion, about there being a separate religious identity or a religious motherland, let's just take a step back and try thinking, was it the case before? uh, was it what is it so inevitable that one group comes out victorious at the cost of other groups? Because we see the temple culture and the stupa culture has sort of, they have been horizontals, they have survived simultaneously, they have prospered simultaneously, often under patronage from same rulers. So the same rulers who were funding Udayagiri caves in Odisha, which is close to which is right now, sorry, so the king who funded Buddhist caves and Buddhist monasteries has also funded many temples. And it's very interesting that even if there was this fundamental partition between those two schools of thought, they have survived together. If they could do it when they had no proper communication, because communication is the key. Because when they had no proper lessons about secularism, about sovereignty, in our time period, when we are so informed, we see ourselves so advanced, is it too difficult to think of a situation where our cultures, where our identities sort of morph into each other, sort of add to each other and bring about something more beautiful? Um, Something like Jataka tales. Now you thinking, okay, where is this podcast leading to? So I'm going to talk about the unifying factor and how Buddhism has played a major role there. So it seems. So Bollywood has been a unifying agent in the Indian psyche. So when it comes to citizenship, we might, the biggest relatability among all citizens. I mean, the sheer number of followers that Bollywood actors have or actresses have on movies, the impact of all Bollywood movies has been many folds to the Indian society. It has sort of dictated the way society behaves, or it has sometimes reflected the aspirations, the generational divide of Indian society. And although Indian society is very amorphous, it's very non-homologous, non-homogenized, it's everyone in India or everyone who watches Bollywood movies can find some character or the other that they relate to, that they think is the proper representation. So what does Buddhism has to do with Bollywood? Well, let's talk about Salman Khan. Despite him being utterly, yeah, he's utterly everything. Despite him being utterly smart, smooth, very talented artist, as an actor, he's also a very nice painter. So you can see that these are the paintings made by Salman Khan of Gautam Buddha. So why bring these two schools of thought together? I mean, these two different persona together, not even schools of thought. These are different worlds colliding. One, uh, some transformer prophetic scene. I can't do it as like Optimus Prime mode, but two worlds colliding. One will survive, one will lose. This podcast is going to take a strange turn from now because we see a lot of Buddhist values that Salman Khan might have inculcated in his movies that we, dumb audience, haven't been able to make out from the movies. So I was watching this phenomenal movie, Jai Ho, which has absurdly high ratings in IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes. And turns out Salman Khan was the one who talks about how, you know,
सीरियसली आपने जो किया है हमारे लिए उसका एहसान हम कैसे चुकाएं? हाउ कैन वी हेल्प? अगर आपको ऐसा लगता है कि हम लोगों ने आप पर कोई एहसान किया है तो आप थैंक यू मत कहिए। इंस्टेड 3 लोगों की मदद कीजिए और उन तीनों से कहना कि वो 3 और की मदद करें। बेटा मैं कुछ समझा नहीं। ये जरा पकड़ना। जैसे मैंने आपकी मदद की, आप 3 लोगों की मदद करेंगे और उनसे कहेंगे कि वो 3 की मदद करें। तो 3 into 3 9 हुआ, into 3 27, 27 into 3 होता है 81। 81 जब 3 की मदद करेंगे तो 243।
things about how you should help people, because if you help the person who is in need of help, they will in turn start a virtuous cycle of helping, which led me to thinking, well, have I read this before? And turns out, yes, Buddha did talk about this. I'll show you how. So if we do a cursory reading of Mahasaro Jataka, Jataka number 302, the story is about a king who rewards this anonymous person who once took care of him. If you and it's unconditional. The king is bestowing half of his kingdom, half of his everything. He's giving out his like royal throne to a stranger who just tended his wound for 5 to 10 days or a week. Let's not go into details of the week. This is a podcast, not an academic paper. I can't cite people here. And when questioned about the rationale behind it, the king says, he helped me when I needed it the most. How can I not help him back? What is the rationale of me not trying to help this person back? And if you think about it, have you seen this or heard this before? Well, I can come up with two instances in the top of my head, and both of them are from Hindu sacred texts. One is about Sudama. If you think about it, Sudama was this long lost friend of Krishna, and to whom he keeps everything that Sudama wanted, and because Sudama A has been a nice person, so this idea that the gift bestowed to the right person is the right thing. It's not that you can give alms or gifts freely to everyone. It's about the right person, the right conduct. So Krishna, when is awarding these gifts to Sudama, like he has been right all this way through. So let me give him all the riches. If you also think about another story that emerges from the day, think about Dasrath, right? Dasrath was, he sort of went about giving up his favorite prince, Ramchandra, and he gave up his aspirations of seeing Rama as a king because, well, Sumitra had tended his wounds when he needed the most. So that sort of like, I mean, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but if you look at it, these stories are being written and being read or being learned by certain people on certain group of elite that knows how to read, how to understand certain stuff. So it's very plausible that certain Jataka stories have influenced. These are the differences in Ramayana, Mahabharata. And if you think about it, it's not very difficult to do so, right? Because we're talking about Brahmins who essentially end up writing all these epics, all these poems, or these religious scriptures. And they are the people who have the knowledge and the authority to understand certain stuff. Which sort of leads us to thinking, I mean, like, what's the relevance of this? It's a we this podcast is about celebrating Jatakas for the values or for the process, for the ideas that they have added to the Indian system or the Indian culture. Second, the way of storytelling, the way of narrative building, the way of sort of creating moral ideas, even if some of them are really faulty. I can definitely vouch that Buddha would have been cancelled because of his heteropatriarch viewpoint on life, certain times, and very fatalist views. Maybe he would have been, but the idea is that stories survive decades, hundreds and centuries, and thousands of years, and there's some sort of resilience in the structure of storytelling or the structure of story building. That structure made it so relevant, so resilient to change, to repetitions, to reiterations. So I would urge all of you to go back to your laptops, your iPads, books, whatever you are comfortable with, and give it a read because these are the essence. This talks a lot about how certain cultures or how certain ideas of our society has come about, and these stories reflect those ideas in older days, in that pristine conditions when these ideas are slowly trying to come up. So if they are sort of a mirrors to our past, and I hope that I can influence or I can sort of honestly request a few of you to go back home, to go back to your place and go to a safe space and start reading of the stories because they are an achievement in themselves and should be celebrated for that. And that's all for today. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in and listening.